This is The Long Road to Publishing, the podcast where we hear from authors who have traveled a long and bumpy road to publishing their books. Whether you're just starting out on your own writing and publishing journey, or if you're all too aware of the many possible detours along the way, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Eva Langston, author, writing instructor, and creator of Eva's newsletter for writers on Substack. Thank you so much for coming along on the ride. Today's show is with Lacey N. Dunham, whose debut novel, The Bells, is coming out just a few days after this episode airs, so we spend some time discussing the intense emotions and anxieties that are common to feel a few months before your book releases, and why maybe all writers need a therapist. Lacey also shares her intentional and highly successful querying strategy, as well as what it was like getting into the publishing world, having come from a rural, lower-class background. As usual, a quick reminder to subscribe, tell your friends about the podcast, post about it on social media, or take a moment to give The Long Road to Publishing a 5-star rating or review if you're on an app that takes such things, because that helps other people find the podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and now on with the episode, which I am calling Successful Strategies and Debut Anxieties. Lacey N. Dunham's debut novel, The Bells, is coming out on September 9th with Atria Simon & Schuster. She has received writing fellowships from the Elizabeth George Foundation, the D.C. Commission on the Arts and Humanities, the Swanee Writers Conference, and Catapult, and her work has been published in Plowshares, Kenyon Review, Witness, and elsewhere. Born and raised on a small family farm, she now lives in Washington, D.C. with too many books, but only 2 cats. Okay, so welcome to The Long Road to Publishing, Lacey.
Eva, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Oh my gosh, me too. And I'm really excited to talk about your book. So before we go into your long journey to the publication of your debut novel, The Bells, well, first of all, it's coming out just a few days after this episode airs, which is exciting. And I'm going to gush for a minute about just how amazing it sounds, because it's been described as dark academia with a Southern Gothic twist, suspense, mystery. It's set in the Appalachian region of Southwest Virginia, which, as a person from that region, I am extra excited. Themes of girlhood, secrets. It's been comped to The Secret History by Donna Tartt. It's been comped to Heathers, the film. It just totally sounds like my jam. So can you give us a quick elevator pitch of what it's actually about?
So it follows a mysterious outsider, Dina Williams, who has a secretive past, and she's convinced that now that she is entering this very elite, exclusive college in Virginia in 1951, that she is going to have everything she needs in order to survive. Except what she doesn't know is that the college itself is harboring a sinister past, and that she's going to have to make some really consequential choices and dangerous choices to decide how much she's willing to prove that she truly belongs. So it's about, I guess, the dark side of girlhood and the intricacies of privilege and this longing for finding our place and finding our group, set against the backdrop of like high conformity and within higher education.
Oh, it sounds really good. Okay, so I have to ask because I was born and raised in Roanoke, Virginia, Star City of the South. I have my Roanoke Star tattoo.
I love it.
So it's very much, I mean, Roanoke is the largest city in southwestern Virginia. So I do have to ask, was this college based on any college in particular, or where did you get your inspiration for the setting?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually went to undergrad in Roanoke. I went to Hollins University, which is itself an all-women's college in Roanoke, or I guess just outside of the city. So very much, kind of borrowed from my own experiences on campus and kind of the feeling of being in that setting, in kind of this mountainous region, in this isolated place, in order to write The Bells.
And I guess it's set in 1951, so did you do some research about what Hollins was like in the 50s, or just what small women's colleges were like in general in the 50s?
Yeah, I did not start out wanting to set this novel in 1951 because I was not in college at that point in time and I really resisted the idea of having to do research. But through the process of writing it, I ended up just kind of being pulled into that time period. And so I did a lot of research around the 50s generally, which I came to really respect as this interesting interregnum period in American history because we've ended World War II, but we're just kind of on the cusp of the civil rights movement. We're still a couple of years away, for example, from Emmett Till's murder, which I think a lot of people cite as like the real catalyst for the civil rights movement. So it was an interesting period ultimately to research. But that part of that then came, looking into my own alma mater at that period of time, looking into the history of women's colleges across the US generally from their founding in the 19th century through to the present day. And I actually found I really enjoyed that piece quite a bit. And it does jump forward to the present a little bit, but the core story is 1951, 1952.
I'm guessing a lot of people listening to this podcast have heard of Holland's, even though it's so small, because, Annie Dillard wrote Pilgrim at Tinker Creek there, and they have a pretty famous creative writing program. So when you went there for undergrad, is that right?
I did, yes. Yeah.
And were you studying creative writing when you were there?
Yeah, so I did study creative writing and then also I double majored and I actually don't remember what my second major was at this point. It was kind of a made up major. They had an option where you could kind of cobble together different classes and so I did that and I gave it some title and now it's escaped me because I'm 20 years out of undergrad.
Yeah.
But they do have a very renowned MFA program in particular, as you mentioned, Annie Dillard, Sally Mann, Kieran Desai, Natasha Trethewey, like a lot of really wonderful writers. And that the MFA program is co-ed. But I kind of ended up at Hollins accidentally. I mean, I don't even know how I heard about them. I'm not originally from Virginia. I'm from the Midwest, but I only applied to two universities. I'm the first person in my family to go to college and quite frankly, had no idea what I was doing and grew up in an extremely rural area, such that Roanoke was overwhelming when I first went there. I was like, whoa, I have never been into a place like so big. And there was a skyscraper, which is hilarious because it's like a 20-story building downtown. So through some process that I can't even retrace, I ended up applying to Hollins and then another university in Ohio, and ended up choosing Hollins for three reasons: because they had a strong creative writing program, because it was a little further away from where I grew up and I wanted a new experience, and they gave me more financial aid.
I've already jumped ahead a little bit, but I'm guessing since you chose Hollins because of the creative writing program, already at 17, you knew that you wanted to be a writer. When do you feel like you got serious about writing? Was it when you started at Hollins or after?
That's a really great question because I think I would answer differently at different points in my life. Certainly at the time at which I went to Hollins and made that decision, I felt like I'm taking myself seriously. This is something I'm interested in enough to kind of prioritize it. But I think it was still elusive to me, right? There's a difference between writing and writing craft and then publishing, which is a business. And I think the gap between writing and publishing is huge. And I think that's where there's often a lot of opaqueness. The publishing industry is notoriously not transparent.
Uh-huh. Hence this whole podcast.
Yes, which is
Yes.
why I'm so grateful this podcast exists. And I went I was in college at a time like before Facebook existed, right? Like I think now people have maybe more access to information, but at the time, like I just didn't, like I studied writing, I did, my BA is in writing and then whatever the other degree is, but I didn't know how to like close that gap from one to the other. And so although I majored in it as an undergrad, it took a very long time subsequently to like both find my footing and also to kind of find an entry point into the larger publishing industry.
Yeah. So you graduated from Hollins, you had a degree in creative writing, and where did you go from there? Because I know, I mean, personally for me, I was always interested in being a writer, but I didn't think it was like a viable career option. So I'm curious, you graduated from college and then what?
Yeah, I think a lot of people very smartly don't see writing as a viable career option. And I think that's why I double majored because, I grew up low income. I'm the first person in my family to go to college. And, there was this sense of like, can you make money in the arts? And probably not. So do something else. But again, like I had no models for like what else
What
to
would that look like,
and like
right?
how to sustain an artistic career while also pursuing something maybe a little bit more financially stable. And so it was really muddled. And I graduated, I actually left a semester early and entered the working world and then kind of just floundered through different things for a while. I was a teacher, a K-12 public education teacher, directly in the classroom for a while, and then burnt out on that. And public education is a tough space to be in, and the needs of students are so immense. It was an extremely difficult job. And so I actually left that and got a bookselling job because I was like, well, I need something to tide me over. And then actually did that job for a few years and then kind of entered the nonprofit sphere in arts education, which was a really interesting mesh between my work as a K-12 educator and my interest in writing and the literary sphere, and then did that for just a little over 10 years at a couple of different nonprofits, and then was laid off shortly after the pandemic. And that ended up being at a really fortuitous time in terms of my focus on writing. And so I've, yeah, been writing kind of more parts of my day are writing now than I was able to sustain working in a full-time nonprofit job.
Yeah, I feel like I see this a lot with, I mean, myself and other and friends is, you graduate and then you're like, okay, I have to get a job to pay the bills, but I'll still write on the side. But then it's so hard and your writing kind of falls to the back burner and it can be really hard to, get back to it. Oh my gosh. And teaching, I was also a public education teacher and it is all consuming emotional, physical, mental, emotion. Did I already say emotional? Yeah. So it's really hard to, at the end of the day, be like, now I'm going to work on my fiction. But so when you were working these jobs, were you also trying to do some of your own writing?
It's a little jumbled in my brain at this point. I do know when I was a direct classroom teacher, I wasn't doing any writing. There, as you mentioned, there just wasn't space or capacity, and it is so emotional. I mean, I was working in early childhood, and I had like 3 kids in my classroom who were experiencing homelessness, and like that's insane. Like you're 5 and you're unhoused, like that should not be allowed to happen. And so trying to figure out ways to support them through the systems as well as educating them. At the end of the day, there's just nothing left for yourself, right?
Hmm.
And then one of the nonprofits jobs, I also was not writing. It was very high intensity, a huge number of hours. And so similarly, I wasn't really writing. There was that period in between when I was at the bookstore, and I actually was doing some writing then. And that's when I wrote a first novel that never went anywhere, but it was, in retrospect, a very good experience to have. And so I really think it's only as I got further along in my career where I was making a bit more money as a salary. And I mean, quite frankly, I got married and my spouse's income was able to supplement what I was bringing in. And that's when I then could make some choices and set some boundaries around the things that I was doing career wise, money wise, in order to make more space for writing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important for people to hear these things because you compare yourself to others, but you don't know what everybody else has going on. And if somebody has a situation where they just have more financial stability and more time in the day, they are going to have more time to focus on their writing than people in other situations. So, well, let's go back to so when you were working at the bookstore and you wrote a novel that didn't go anywhere, do you mean that you kind of wrote it and were like, this isn't any good, or did you try to query it to agents?
Yeah, absolutely. So I tell myself 10 years on this book, and again, like the bookstore period was the period where I had the most time to focus on it. And so was the most productive, though I hate that word. It was when I was able to move kind of the most quickly through it.
Hmm.
But like start to finish, I would say like probably 10 years, maybe longer. If I think about it more than 10 years, I would have a breakdown probably.
Yeah.
But I worked on this book for an insanely long time. And I did query agents, and I was very fortunate. I did get a number of requests for partials or fulls, but at the end of the day, there were, no agent signed me, no agent took me on. And it was devastating. I mean, quite honestly, at that period in time, it was like the worst thing that could have happened to me in my mind. And part of it is the amount of time and effort, and part of it was, I felt like I was reaching for this thing, and I wasn't succeeding. I felt like a failure. I think I felt ashamed. With hindsight, and with the very privileged position I'm in now, with a debut coming out, I think it was very good, and I'm very lucky that that book didn't get picked up, because it's not the book that I would have wanted to set the tone for my career.
Yes, I feel everything you're saying, all of those emotions. I felt that the like time you put into something and then to feel like, oh, I have nothing to show for myself, can be so hard. But yeah, in hindsight, I mean, I think that too, where the first novel that I ever wrote, would I want that to have been my debut novel? Now I'm like, oh gosh, no. That was probably a novel that should just stay in the drawer. So yeah, I think it can be so helpful to kind of reflect and have people hear that, even though it can be hard to feel like, oh, I've worked on something and not gotten it published, the long view of your career, it was the right thing to happen.
It goes back to the bit that we were just talking about trying to find ways to fit writing into a life that for most of us is not built around writing, because that isn't sustainable. I think that pressure that you put on yourself to, like, this time must be worth it, and it must be worth it because I have a book deal, is a really like negative narrative, and I think not a very realistic one, because none of it ultimately is time wasted. It's all part of the process, and you learn how to write a novel by writing a novel, and that doesn't mean that that novel is going to be any good, but the only way to get better is to have the experience of writing a novel that maybe doesn't go anywhere. And so I think, it is hard to convince yourself that trying to fit all of these little moments of writing into the cracks of your day, and then not have a book picked up by an agent, is like the be all end all, like that's it for your writing career. But I don't think it is. Like, I think it's just a part in the long journey.
Yeah. What happened next when, you finally did kind of have some time to go back to your writing and work on another manuscript?
Yeah, so as I said, it was completely devastating that this book didn't go anywhere at that point in time, and then I had left bookselling, and was in this very high intensity job. I was working like 60 hours a week. Only after I'd left that job and entered a new position that I was starting to tinker again with writing, and at that point, it was really tiptoeing into like short stories, and I turned my attention to working for literary journals. And I'd always worked kind of for literary journals, or really, I should say volunteered, because it's all unpaid labor. But this was when I think was really kind of elevating my involvement in those spaces. And so that felt like, okay, I'm kind of resetting. I'm kind of trying to think maybe a little bit more strategically about the business side. And then I think a lot of people probably have the story. The pandemic came, and suddenly I was at home and I didn't have to commute anywhere. And that gave me so much more time back in my day. I started thinking about writing a book again. And I can't pinpoint the moment at which I was like, I'm writing a novel. I do know there was a point where I very concretely said to myself, I want to write the book that interests me. I want to write a book that's the type of stuff I enjoy and the type of stuff I want to read, not the book I feel like I should be writing, which was the first book. And I mean, they're so completely different as to be like not even by the same person. Like, it's truly wild. And I think that this book, The Bells, that's coming out, is so much truer to who I am as both a writer but also a reader. And I think as a result, it sustained me through what is always going to be a very long process of writing, and then for me, publishing a novel, because it's not, even if you're a fast writer, you write it and then you're going to have to revise it, and then you're going to have to revise it again, and you're going to have to look at it again. And I mean, I was sick of this book, 6 months ago, because I was like, been in it too deep and I've seen it too much. And, I think that's why, for a lot of reasons, it's really important to write into your obsessions and your own interest, as opposed to trying to meet some idea of the market or some idea of like what you think is the thing that's going to make you, I don't know, appear really erudite or literary or whatever.
Right. I'm wondering if because you had this creative writing degree, was the thing you thought you should be writing very literary fiction, kind of highbrow? Is that what you felt like you should have been writing with that first manuscript?
It was, but it was not as a result, at least in my recollection of the creative writing degree, because again, I went to a women's college, and so we were reading, I think there's like certain canonical works that you're reading, but then we were also reading beyond that in a lot of ways. I think it was quite frankly, I think it was actually working at the bookstore,
Mm-hmm.
where at least at that time, and I think things have probably shifted, but I think there was this, I very much actually remember a manager like in my first week asking me what I thought of like an article in the latest New Yorker. And I was like, I don't know what that is. And he was like very taken aback and was like, "What do you mean? You haven't read the New Yorker and you call yourself a writer?" And like immediately I was just flooded with shame and I was like, "Oh my God." And so I had to fix this. And in bookstores, if magazines don't sell, they strip the covers. And then at least in the bookstore I worked at, they strip the cover, they send back the cover to the distributor and you get like a credit on your account. And then the issues they would just like put in the break room. And so during my break, I would sit and I would read the New Yorker, but I would start at the very first page with the like goings on about town, which are, I mean, I guess if you're in New York, maybe you read those, but I mean, that's not the interesting part of the news,
Right.
right? But I had no idea. So I'm like reading this like small ass font and, the three stacked columns. And I'm like, this is so boring. Like, what am I supposed to be getting out of this? But I was like, well, I have to do this. Like, I'm not a real writer if I'm not reading the New Yorker. And I think that idea like sent me on this path of like, okay, I have to be like literary and highbrow and I have to read like literary and highbrow stuff. And I went into a very deep hole of reading like only men for like 6 years, which like, I mean, there's great books out there by dudes, but also it's kind of a waste of my time, like in terms of the type of writing I'm interested in and the type of people who are writing characters that I'm interested in.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I definitely remember reading The New Yorker when I was in my 20s too. I think it was like coming out of my MFA, and I was like, I have to be a serious writer. And
Yeah, but I think it's interesting that the New Yorker holds this place of like, I don't know, almost like power in the imagination because it's not even a literary journal. Like the writing in the New Yorker is impeccable. The research, when there's researched articles, is great. I mean, I'm a huge Patrick Radden Keefe fan. Like, I think the New Yorker is spectacular, but it's not a literary journal. They publish a single short story. Like there are other journals
right.
that you can read and learn to write from and that also aren't exclusively literary and I think somehow people are willing to make this connection and then to I think create a sense of like shame or like oh you're not a writer if and like I just don't buy into that anymore. I did at one point but certainly now I feel like I see through it all.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. So you wrote this book that you felt like, okay, this is actually me. This is what I'm interested in. This is where I want to spend my time. How long do you feel like it took you to write this manuscript? And are we talking about the bells? This is what would become the bells, right?
Yeah, it had a terrible title for a very long time. I'm really bad at titles. I think most people are actually. So, I think with anything, like where does it start and where does it end is very hard to pinpoint because ideally, if you're writing, you are constantly reading, you are constantly like taking in the world and observing and like reflecting on ideas. And so I think that what would ultimately become many of the themes in the bells had probably been something I was processing in an overt or a more hidden way in my brain for a while. But I started, I guess, like actually writing it at the very, very tail end of 2020. I mean, it was like December 28th or something, like basically 2021. So I I actually gave myself a word count. I was like, I'm going to have 50,000 words by June. And then I just worked backwards. How many days a week do I want to write? Let me divide 50,000 by this number of days, and came up with kind of a daily goal, which ended up being 500 words a day, which sounds easy to the uninitiated. Very difficult often to achieve those 500 words. And I don't know whether I met that 50,000 word goal. And I don't recommend that to everyone. I think at the time that's what I needed. And that felt like a concrete thing. And it was fun to kind of write in a little note card and track the words and see them accumulate. But then I would say fast forward, my finished manuscript that I queried with came about in, I want to say late 2023. I probably made some tweaks to it. I think that timeline is right. Time is
I know it's hard to remember too. I hear you. Well, I was gonna say too, because I was gonna ask, oh, did the word count goal work for you? And you're like, I don't remember if I met the goal or not. So maybe I can't ask that. But I do think, it's good to understand that like everybody has a different practice of what works for some people doesn't work for other people. What works for you at this period in your life might not work in another period in your life. But I do always feel like it's helpful for me to remind myself that like what's a page, like 250 words. So 500 words, I think it's like 2 pages double spaced. And it's like, okay, that doesn't, like you said, doesn't sound like that much. So if I write 2 pages, maybe 5 days a week, like you'll get to a novel in less than a year, and I think people can be so daunted by the idea of writing a novel that it's good to think like, okay, like turtle pace and you can get there. So you said you felt like it was finished. Was this like the draft was finished, but you still needed to do revisions, or you had done a lot of revising on it?
That was doing a lot of revising. And then again, the timeline is a little nebulous in my brain, but I believe I queried, it was either 23 or maybe was it 24? But I queried in the spring. So I had completed the manuscript, had worked through several rounds of revisions. I actually was in a novel generator course with Catapult when they were still offering workshops, and it was spectacular. And it's actually quite upsetting that they're not doing them anymore, because I feel like I benefited so much from that cohort. But the cohort had ended, and I spent another couple of months revising, and then I let it sit before looking at it again, doing those kind of final tweaks and querying. And I just can't nail down
Yeah. Oh,
here.
that's okay. But you said something very important, which is you had done all these revisions and then you let it sit before you started querying agents, which I know is so hard. I think well, we were talking about like this, I don't know, maybe feeling that comes from capitalism of like, we have to be productive and then we have to have something to show for our work and our time. And so then it's like you finish the novel and you're like, I got to get it out to agents. I've got to, get it out. I don't know. That's how I often feel. And I see so many people sending it out too soon and burning their bridges. And you might think it's great. And then you let it sit for a couple months. You come back to it with fresh eyes and you're like, oh, now I see things that like clearly need to change. So that is a very good piece of advice, I think. You weren't giving it as advice, but I'm pulling it out as advice. So you let it sit and then you started querying agents. And how did the query process go for you?
It was terrifying, as it is, I think, for anyone. I was very strategic with the query process, and I actually started fresh. So I had the list of agents I'd queried before who had requested things, and agents from that prior experience that I had kind of identified, but so much time had passed, and there are so many changes that happen within publishing. Some of those agents who'd requested the manuscript weren't even in the business anymore. And so I was like, I'm going to start fresh. And so actually all along kind of the process of revising the bells, I was looking at different book deals in Publishers Marketplace. I was like reading Publishers Weekly, and I would just like screen capture anytime I was like, ooh, this book sounds like it maybe has like some companion things with my book, and like here's the agent's name. And I would just screenshot it and send it in to myself in an email and put it in an email folder. So kind of all along the way, I was doing the research, but I wasn't organizing it. And then when I was ready to switch modes, I went into that folder, pulled all of those names into a massive spreadsheet, did the requisite research then, their agency. Were they open to submissions as an agent? What did they represent? Who are their clients? What are they looking for? Do they have a manuscript wish list? And then from there, I think I had a list of 80 or 90 names. I separated it into quadrants of 10 and labeled them as like, here are my tier one pitches, tier two, all the way down to 10. And within those tiers, I had a mix of, prestigious agents who have a lot of kind of high profile clients, and newer agents who are maybe a little hungrier and more eager and also had more space to take on clients. And so then I started with tier one and went through and pitched. And actually, I didn't even get past tier two. I was very, very lucky this time around.
Wow.
I do think a lot of it is luck, but I do think it's strategy. Like I very specifically looked for agents who either were from the South or had some connection to the South because my book is set in the South. And I think that's an important background for an agent to have if they're going to truly understand my book. And so I mixed a lot of those folks, into each of my tiers. And as it is, the agent that I have, well, she's a born and bred New Yorker and lives in New York now. Clearly, she's an agent. She went to undergrad in South Carolina, and I think that perspective really helped her understand the novel and not just the novel setting, but the novel's kind of larger context and positioning.
Oh, I love this. I love how organized you were. Well, like you said, originally you're just kind of cramming everything in an email folder, but still, like that's a really great idea. And it sounds like you had a good strategy, you had good organization. So, okay, so then you signed with your agent, and then what happened? Did she have revision notes for you?
Oh yeah. I mean, this is the crazy part, right? Is that I think you're always told, like, take the book as far as you can take it. But there's still, I think, a lot of work to be done for a lot of people. I personally would find it a red flag if an agent took me on as a debut author, or as a hopeful debut author and had very minimal revisions. Like I would see that as someone who perhaps is not advocating for your career. They're just advocating for that one book. And I think it's incredibly important to find an agent who you're going to mesh with as a business partner for the course of your career. Because for every book an agent has published, they have 5 books that haven't sold to publishers. And so you want someone who is in it for the long haul with you, no matter what happens. So we did spend, I would say, probably 9 or 10 months on revisions. I did like 2 big, or maybe a big and a half big overhaul structurally, and with a few other things in the book. And then there were like some small tinkerings that we did. And then we went out on submission, which I think is the piece that a lot of people, when they're focusing on trying to become published and on that business side, don't focus on and maybe don't even know about. But I think it's actually critically important. I think more important than just thinking about the agent, because I think everyone's goal is to get an agent, but you can have an agent and not have a book sell. And so I think going on submission is like the next critical piece. So we went on submission and I was very lucky to sell it.
How long were you on submission for?
It was very short. I want to say it was like maybe 3 weeks.
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, my agent strategy is very much, and every agent has a different strategy. And so for folks who, are querying agents or maybe, have potentially some agent offers and they're trying to decide, I think it's worthwhile to ask, like, what is your submission strategy? Because agents will have different strategies. Mine agent's approach is to kind of go big or go home. So we actually put together a list, I think, of like 30 editors. And she was like, I'm going to send it to these 30. Like, if you have names to add or names to drop, let me know. And so she like sent it to this very like big list, but targeted, right? Folks that she felt were a good fit. Whereas other agents will do it in smaller batches. I have friends where like their agents will send it to like 10. And if,
hmm
depending on the feedback, then they'll kind of regroup. And so I think it's important, as a writer, to kind of know what your agent's approach and style is. And do you mesh with that? Are you comfortable, kind of going in tiers and potentially having to revise based on editors' feedback?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm saying wow to 3 weeks because sometimes it can take forever just for the editors to read. So there was certainly your agent was doing something right in the submission package or doing something right in, the way that she was submitting to get those editors to read right away. Yeah, and I think it's also, I think you're right that there's so much focus when you're trying to get into this world of getting the agent, getting the agent, getting the agent, but you don't want just any agent. You don't want to just like sign with somebody just because they want you. You want to make sure they're a good fit because there's so much more that comes after it. And like you said, you have to make sure that you mesh with your agent, that you agree with the revisions that they think the book needs,
I'm nodding so
everything.
emphatically because I think it's, and I know it sounds crazy, but like no agent is far better than having a bad agent. So many people end up in unproductive, toxic, unhealthy, possibly even scam artisty agent relationships because there's such an emphasis on just getting through that first gatekeeper. And I understand that that is like striking lightning in and of itself, but like I promise you, if you sign with a bad agent, it is going to set your career back in ways that you can't even imagine. And if you're getting any type of like listen to your intuition, if there's any red flags, certainly no. If there's any pink flags, like you don't have to say yes. If anyone's pressuring you to like urgently make a decision,
Hmm.
that's a certain sign I think that you should listen to.
And then, I mean, I know you can probably Google online and find all questions that you can ask a potential agent, but also you can say, can I reach out to some of your clients and talk to their clients and see how they feel? Because, yeah, I think there is such a like desperation to get an agent that then you might end up overlooking some of those red and pink flags. Well, so yeah, so it's sounding like, even though you kind of had a long time to get to this point, then, oh, I always hear publishing is moves at a snail's pace until it moves at a lightning pace, right? It goes very slow and then very fast. So you very quickly got your book deal. What was it like working with your editor?
I mean, to your point of like moving fast and moving slow, like everything when it happened around the book deal was so quick. It was if I had been teaching, there would have been no way I could have managed it because I was in the fortunate place where I got to talk to multiple editors and I mean you're like taking calls like back to back in like a 48-hour time period and so it was like this really kind of like rapid pace thing and then it's like quiet for a while and so even something like signing the contract, it's all a handshake deal, at least in Big Five publishing.
That's kind of
For
scary.
a while. It is, and I think this goes back to like publishing is not transparent, and I think that approach, at least coming from the Big Five, opens the door up to like scam artist publishers and relationships and so again it's why you got to have a good agent if you're seeking certain types of publishing opportunities because they're going to hopefully vet anyone out who might be unscrupulous. So we signed, we celebrated all that stuff, and then it was like I think I got my contract like 3.5 months later, and apparently that was very fast. Like everyone was like, "Whoa, that's real, that's a real turnaround." And
Wow.
I was like, "Wow, three." I mean, I talked to a lawyer friend, and she was like, "Absolutely not. Like, you should have that contract like within 24 hours." And I was like,
You're like,
"Just
that's not how publishing works.
and and I understand her concern. It was, for any other normal industry, absolutely you should have a contract right away. So it was like my contract was 3.5 months. I think my editor and I had a preliminary meeting in that period. And then I think edits didn't even come through for like another 4 months or so. And, similar to the agent relationship, you want to be listening in these conversations that you're having with editors when you go on submission for someone who really understands the book as you intend it to be understood and is going to help amplify that and not make it a different book. And there was certainly one editor I spoke to who I felt like I really connected with on a personal level. I could immediately see myself like going out for drinks with that person. But in terms of what their approach was to the book, I was like, ooh, I think they're trying to make it slightly different than like what I envision this book as. And that was a key deciding factor in actually choosing the editor I went with.
Yeah, it's interesting when you were talking about like, oh, I'd want to have drinks with this person, but are they the right editor for my book? I think both with the like agent relationship and the editor relationship, it's such a weird road to walk of like, how much are they my friend? I mean, with an agent, like you are their client, they're working for you, but also you kind of had to like put yourself at their mercy to get them to sign you in the first place. And then like, yeah, I don't know. And I know everybody has different relationships with their agent of like how friendly they are versus how more businesslike it is. But it's just, I don't know, it's such a weird, nebulous world.
It's highly relational. I think all of publishing is highly relational, and I think that opens the door to like these blurred lines. And again, everyone's going to have, as you said, their different desires and styles and approaches. I personally prefer a much more like business relationship. But even in my emails to friends, it's like, dear so and so, like blah blah blah, like best, like like
Yeah.
I'm very formal for some reason, and so I wanted an agent who, the correspondence was going to be over email because I also want that paper trail and those receipts, and who would be supportive and who would be a cheerleader and who would have my back, but in a very professional business mindset.
Yeah, I was interviewing Courtney Mom, and she was saying that she and her agent will scream at each other. And I was like, whoa, you have a very different relationship. But again, everybody works differently, I guess. Well, so okay, so The Bells is coming out a few days after this episode airs. We're still in the summer right now, but it's going to be fall before you know it. What are you doing to prepare for the big day and prepare for the book going out into the world?
Yes, alternately feeling joyous and curling into a ball and crying. I mean, it's it's such a bizarre space. I'm about 6 weeks out right now. I think I'm 41 days, not that I've been counting. And it is everyone who has come before me in my 2025 kind of cohort of other authors has said you will start to feel an intense anxiety like at the 2 month mark, maybe the 3 month mark. And I hadn't felt it for a while. And I was like, oh, like all this therapy I've been doing is paying off. Like anxiety is going to pass me by. And it came like a semi truck and ran me over because I think there is so much of publishing, and this is why I think it's critical for writers to separate the creative part from the business part, because in the business part, there's so little that's in your control. Like I cannot control, certainly not the Goodreads reviewers. I can't control any reviewers even reading it. If they read it, I can't control what they're going to say. Like and there's anxieties about, well, what would it look like if all of these things happened, or if I got the worst of the worst, or and then I think it's hard not to be anxious about certain metrics. Certainly sales is a big one, because again, publishing is a business, and they're not going to take away your writer card if you don't meet expectations with sales, but certainly that's going to impact, what your editor or your publisher is going to be willing to do for you with the next book, or whether they'll even, want to do a next book with you, depending on what your contract looks like. I had a 1 book contract. And so you're suddenly just so anxious and so worried. And then, I think there's a component too of you're putting this thing out in the world that once it's out there, like you can control the narrative of like how you're talking about the book, but how people are reading it, interpreting it, and understanding it, you can't control. And that's can be a very scary consideration. And so where am I mentally and emotionally? All over the place. I have gotten some good news in the past couple of days, and so I think I'm like in a very like good place at the moment. But I mean, to show how up and down publishing is, on Thursday, I was having a deep spiral and comparing and despairing to other friends I have who have books coming out in September, and checking numbers I should not have even bothered my brain with, and was like, this book is gonna be a complete flop, and like, why did I even bother? And just like really spiraling. And then accidentally stumbled on a starred review from Library Journal in the process of spiraling. And I was like, well, holy shit, this is a really good review. And then became consumed with joy about that. And I mean, it was all within the span of literally 2 or 3 hours on the same day. And
Oh my gosh.
get a good
Yeah.
therapist. That's honestly I think like get a good therapist.
Yeah. I see you taking some deep breaths, so
Yeah.
that's good.
Yeah.
Deep breath. Well, okay, so I think I have two questions. So you mentioned like kind of your cohort of other debut authors.
Yeah, so it's kind of this cool thing that you have the privilege and the luck to publish a book, and suddenly everyone else who has a book coming out in that same year becomes part of your informal cohort. And all kinds of writers, all genres, all age groups. I'm someone who really believes in the necessity of community because otherwise you would just lose your mind, I think, if you didn't have community around you. And also, I believe a rising tide lifts all boats. And so I was very intentional about connecting with other people who are also debuts. And so I have, different little groups that I'm in, and some exist only online. Some were, folks I found through groups online. And then we kind of formed a smaller pod together and we meet bi-weekly. I was in the Poets and Writers publicity cohort, Get the Word Out cohort. And so that was another group of writers that now we're connected kind of more personally, and again, meet and, going to their book events locally and all of that. And so it just becomes kind of this group of people that are in it at the same time you are and who really get all of the emotions and all of the ups and downs. And like as much as your friends or your family or your partner want to understand or try to understand, they truly just will not get it. And so it's so important to have this community of writers.
Yeah. So are a lot of these groups, you just sought them out yourself, it sounds like?
So some of them I sought out. Some of them I intentionally created by extending invitations to people. And so I think you have to be intentional about it, and it certainly takes work. But it is so important to get to know those folks and let them get to know you. And I think to build bridges across different publishers, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it's not all Simon and Schuster folks. It's actually a lot of small press folks in different genres too. One of the people who's become a good writing friend writes like upper middle grade and YA books. So we're not even in the same sphere, which has been really lovely.
The other thing I wanted to ask, because you talked a little bit about this anxiety of what if the book doesn't perform or doesn't live up to expectations. And I know we've talked about how not transparent the publishing industry can be. Did you get any like concrete thoughts from your agent or your editor or your marketing team of like, here's what we're hoping this book will do? Or is it all just sort of like your own swirling thoughts?
That's a really great question. So, most of it I would say is my own swirling thoughts. That said, I think one thing that writers might find their brains obsessing with, and of course, every writer is different, is that you can find numbers in different places. And whether those numbers are moving up or down or how big or small they are can become a thing you obsess over. So there is a digital platform that is primarily used by booksellers and librarians called Edelweiss, and sometimes publishers will put like first print run numbers on there, and those numbers are fake. Like they're not. They're hopeful and aspirational, but they're not what definitively the publisher is printing. But writers have been known to see that and then check in like 6 months later, and the number has gone up or down, and you feel some kind of way about it.
Oh, I see. So you see this number of like how many they're going to print, and then you see later that the number they're going to print goes down and you freak out. But like you're saying these numbers are kind of not to be trusted to
The
begin with.
original numbers were not real anyway, right? Like there's a target goal that publishers are setting because again, it's a business and they have profit and loss sheets, and they're, going to say, "Oh, I hope, this book that we spent this much on is going to sell at this level," and they're going to put that into their little spreadsheets. And sometimes they want to signal to people who are influential in the book industry or people who are book buyers, we're really coming out big behind this book because this is, 200,000 first print run or something. And that would be like, I don't know, not even a Dan Brown level. Dan Brown's like beyond that. But, it's like
Yeah,
that would
yeah.
be very, very good. But it's not real. It's aspirational. It's the publisher hoping that this book is going to do well. And at the end of the day, like no one really knows what makes a book sell. And that's kind of the crazy thing. Like certainly the bigger your advance, the more they have to invest in you because they have to earn back that money. But there's books that get seven-figure deals that the publisher has to invest a lot of marketing and publicity resources behind that don't do well. And
Yeah.
there's books that got $30,000 advances and 6 months out of the gate, the book's been out for 6 months and suddenly it takes off and everyone's like, well, all right.
Yeah. Well, so when this episode airs, your book's going to be coming out, and I'm going to include in the show notes a link so listeners can pre-order. If they're listening to this right away, they can pre-order the book. Do you want to talk a little bit about why pre-orders are important to authors?
Oh boy. The question might be, are pre-orders important? This
Well,
is
yeah, I feel like I've seen some debate on are they actually as important as we've been told they are. So I don't know. Do you have thoughts?
Yeah, the pre-order question. So at no point ever from my publisher was I ever told to push pre-orders.
Really
Pre-order
interesting.
pushes that I've done on both social and through email and like personal relationships has all been driven by me. How important are pre-orders? I honestly don't know. It certainly doesn't hurt if you're in a position to pre-order a book for an author you're willing to take a risk on or an author you love. It's certainly not going to hurt and it may very well help them. Is it something authors absolutely have to do? I'm not sure, even though we're all told somewhere in the miasma of the universe to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I've certainly been hearing for years of like, oh, pre-orders are so important. And I think I read recently read an article Evelyn Sky had written about like why pre-orders are important. But then I've also seen kind of some pushback of like, actually, does it really help? Unclear. Like many things in publishing, it is all shrouded in mystery.
I
It's
mean, do
like,
you pre-order books or have you traditionally
yeah,
pre-ordered
that's
books?
a great question. I will occasionally pre-order a book for two reasons. One, if it's a friend, or two, if it's like an author who, like, for example, Jennifer McMahon, who I love and will read anything she writes. If she has a book coming out, I'll pre-order it mostly so that I don't forget to get it. And then I know it'll just appear on my Kindle as soon as it's, out. But yeah, I mean, and I talked about this recently with Kern Carter of just like books are so expensive and like it's really hard. We want to support all the debut authors of 2025, but can we afford to? No.
I mean, and like three thoughts I have on that. The first is that like I as an author only ever pre-ordered a book beginning this year. And it was often books by friends or books I wanted to support for one reason or another. I have never before 2025 pre-ordered a book in my life. I don't know, but I think pre-order if you're not able to pre-order, there are so many other ways to support an author. Requesting that your library get that book. You can also support that author on social media, liking their posts, commenting on their posts. Again, does social media move books? I don't know. Word of mouth, I think, is huge. I mean, most people do not run out and buy reviews or buy books because they've read a great review. They maybe have heard a great review of the book, and then maybe they hear the author on a podcast or on NPR. And then their friend is like, oh my God, I read this incredible book. And they're like, this is the third
Hmm.
time I'm hearing about it. But it's their friend's word of mouth recommendation where they're like, okay, well, I'm going to go buy this book. And so I think word of mouth can pay dividends for
Well,
for
yeah, because I'm trying to
authors.
remember how I first found out about your book. And I think you did reach out to me, but I had heard of your book before you reached out to me. And I think it was on
Excited.
social media because I think like Penny Zhang, who wrote Doll Parts, had posted.
Yes, she's in one
Yeah,
of my
she had
little
posted
groups.
about it, and her book has a lot of similarities, I think, to yours. And I was like, oh, I loved her book, and this book sounds, but I think I had seen a couple of people post about it. I guess we run in similar circles. We're both DC area writers, so we probably have a lot of overlap. But yeah, and so I think when you reached out to me, I was like, wait, that sounds familiar. And so you're right, it's that like word of mouth, kind of seeing it a couple of times, and maybe the third or fourth time you see it or hear about it, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that did sound interesting. Well, okay, so speaking of us being both DC writers, I know you teach for the Writer Center, but also I saw on your bio that you do other workshops both for youth and adults. What's been your experience with teaching writing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's such a wonderful thing to work with students of any age, and I've had the pleasure of working with students as young as 4, and folks who are probably in their 70s or 80s. I forget who said this, but there's a quote about teaching where I'm paraphrasing, but it's like when I teach, I touch the past, the present, and the future all at once. And like, who is too good to do something like that? I had a teacher in fifth grade. The book is dedicated in part to her. And she was the first person who I remember we had to write little stories for class assignments. And I turned in one that was like 20 pages. And I remember setting it on the corner of her desk, and my classmates are turning theirs in. And she's like, here's Jackson's story, and here's Kyle's story, and here's Sarah's story, and here's Lacey's novel. And I remember like, like novel. And yeah, that stuck with me. I mean, I was 10 at the time, and I'm significantly older than that now.
I love that story because it shows the power of like a single one little throwaway line from an adult has such power. Well, which can be both good and bad, of course. But in this case, like
Yeah.
just saying that stuck with you so long that you dedicated the book to your fifth grade teacher. That's amazing. Does she know?
She does not know. I have her email address. She's still in my hometown. She recently retired from teaching. So I hope to connect with her during my hometown
Oh, that's
event.
so, yeah, you
Yeah.
should definitely tell her. I'm sure, well, we're both former classroom teachers, so I always appreciate it when a student reaches out to me and says something nice many, many years later, and you realize, oh, like, okay, I guess I did make a difference, even though it didn't feel like it at the time. Well, I just have a few more questions. I know we're going to have to hop off here soon, but what is something that surprised you?
I think the publishing world in particular is like separate from writing, has a real class problem, social class problem. And so I don't know if being surprised at so many steps in the journey are because of my social class background. Like I didn't know anyone who was an artist of any sort growing up. Like everyone I know is a teacher, which is probably why I went into teaching initially, or a police officer. Law enforcement is a very stable and pays well where I grew up, or they work in factories, on the line at the auto plants or at the foundry, or they work at Walmart. Walmart's the largest employer in like my Tri-County hometown area. And so like the idea of turning an art into something that I can possibly make money off of, even if I have to supplement it with other forms of income, was just so like outside my realm of experience, knowledge. Like I didn't even know like who do I ask these questions of. And so I felt, I think, in some ways pleasantly surprised and sometimes not so pleasantly surprised
Hmm.
by so much of what it means to
Yeah.
publish.
Well, so I end every episode with a tip for the road for our listeners. What tip do you have?
I'm going to give 3 tips. The first, to find your community and to build those relationships. Community is absolutely essential. You cannot do this alone. The second tip, I mean this very sincerely, have a therapist. Make sure you have a relationship with them prior to going on this journey. And you will probably have to do a lot of explaining to them along the way. But just having a space to process, I think, is necessary and is going to help everyone who goes on this journey. And the third tip is to set up a separate email account from your personal one that's just your author one. I did not do that, and I get everything from doctor's reminders to receipts when I tap, to pay for my coffee, to invitations connected to my book, to my edits from my editor. It all comes into my one account. And
That is a very practical and good tip that I also did not do. And I would agree. I can't remember who had told me this. Somebody said when they were querying, set up a separate querying email address that was not connected to their phone so that they weren't constantly checking their phone to see if they had gotten responses from agents. I was like, that is so smart for your mental health. And I'm also having a brainstorm about your second tip about getting a therapist because I have a therapist. I've been kind of lax about meeting with her this summer, but she does not understand the writing world. So when I tell her like, oh, my novel died on submission, I'm so depressed, she's like, what does that mean? Well, can you just like self-publish it instead? And I'm like, okay, she really doesn't get it and like have to spend a lot of time explaining. So now I'm like, oh my gosh, there should be writer specific therapists, like people who are familiar with the writing and publishing industry offering therapy. Someone out there could do that and make a lot of money, I bet.
It could make a ton of money, 100%. And if I had any inclination to go to grad school slash become a therapist, I would do it. But those are
I
not
know.
things
I'm
I'll be doing
thinking
in
like
life.
in an alternative life, because I was actually a psychology major. So I'm like, oh man,
To do
I could
it.
just
Add it to
go
your
back
full
to
plate,
school
already
for a
full
couple
plate.
more years, be a writer therapist. Yeah. Okay. Well, now you've given me another idea for another career.
I mean, look, I think there can be a degree of frustration for sure. Like sometimes my therapist will ask questions and I'm just like, ugh, this is like not even 101 level. Like, but it also has been very empowering, I think, in a way to be like, all right, let me step back and say, like, hey, like here's what it means to go on submission, what it means to die in submission, and like why I can't then just like jump ship to self-publish necessarily. And I don't know, I have found it at times, while it's been occasionally frustrating, especially when my emotions are really high and I'm really keyed up and I just want to like get it all out. When I've been able to step back and have been in a position where I can kind of walk her through some of these component parts, it has been empowering because it's like, wow, I've learned a lot, and there's a lot of component parts, and none of it makes sense, and it's like almost set up to just create the biggest anxiety storm that you possibly could. Something she reminds me of constantly. She's like, this is not how a normal like place would approach something because it creates
Yeah.
so much anxiety. And I'm like, it's a good
That,
reminder.
yeah,
Thank
like
you.
explaining it kind of gives you like you're able to come up a little bit and see it from a more bird's eye view and give yourself some space. That makes sense.
Yes, she is on vacation right now, and I was like,
Not a
this
good
is not a
time for
good
your
time.
therapist to go on vacation. I hope she's back by September.
She is, she is. We all deserve very long vacations. So
Yeah.
I'm glad she's taking one.
Well, Lacey, thank you so much. This has been so fun, and I hope everybody checks out your book, whether they pre-order it or not.
Thanks, Eva. This has been such a pleasure to chat with you. And truly, I think just more transparency and demystification of publishing is needed. And so I'm
Yeah,
glad
me
you're doing
too.
this
And always
podcast.
happy to give a shout out to Roanoke as well. So that made me happy. The Long Road to Publishing is produced and edited by me, Eva Langston, and the intro and outro music comes from the artist Soundroll on Upbeat. You can find me online on Instagram, Bluesky, and Substack with the handle Eva Langston. Even better, find my newsletter for writers at evalangston.substack.com, and feel free to send me an email. The podcast address is longroad.pub@gmail.com. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and I'll be back soon with more stories about the long and winding path to publishing and more tips for the road.